"Your sister brought a better gift," my father shouted, and his voice was the kind of loud that had nothing to do with the noise in the room. It was loud the way a thunderclap is loud. It didn't compete with the surrounding sound, it simply erased it. "Look at this! Look at what Shania brought me and your mother. Look at it!" He held up the envelope Shania had given them. Inside it was a check. I knew this because Shania had told me about it 3 weeks ago, casually. The way she told me everything, as a demonstration of power rather than a sharing of information. $2,000, she had said. "I'm giving them $2,000. What are you giving them?" And I had said I made them something, and Shania had looked at me with a smile that lived only on her mouth and said, "Oh, Naya, how sweet." My gift was on the table in front of my father now. He had thrown it there, a hand-beaded medicine pouch I had spent 4 months making. Sat working on it in the early mornings before my shift at the diner, stitching turquoise and coral and white shell beads into a pattern I had learned from a photograph of my grandmother's work. A pattern that belonged to our family, to our clan, to something older than any check or any bank account. I had lined it with deerskin I had traded for. I had prayed over it. I had rolled it in cedar smoke, and my father had opened it, looked at it for 3 seconds, looked at Shania's envelope, and then looked at me. That was when he reached for his belt. I want to be precise about this because I have spent a long time being imprecise about my own life, smoothing its edges so other people would be more comfortable, so my family would be more comfortable, so I would not be the girl who made scenes or caused trouble or forced people to take sides. I want to be precise. My father, Raymond Runningwater, removed his belt from his pants at his own wedding anniversary party, in front of approximately 60 people, and struck me across the upper arm and shoulder with it, once, then twice, then a 3rd time before someone, I think it was my Uncle Desmond, said his name in a warning voice and he stopped. The pain was extraordinary, not just the surface sting of leather but something deeper, a crack that went all the way to the bone, and I would find out later at the emergency room that the radius in my left arm had fractured. A small fracture, the doctor said. A gay hairline, but a fracture nonetheless, real and documented and photographed in black and white, the kind of evidence that does not lie and does not soften itself for anyone's comfort. I did not cry out. I want you to know that. I bit the inside of my cheek and I tasted blood and I did not make a sound because I had learned very young that making sounds only extended things, only gave my father more to respond to, more to punish, more to perform against. So I stood there with my arm burning and my vision going white at the edges, and I looked at the medicine pouch on the table, my 4 months of morning work, and I thought with a clarity that surprised me. I am leaving this room, and I am never coming back. My name is Naya Runningwater, or it was. I am 23 years old. I am Diné, Navajo, on my father's side and on my mother's side, or so I had always been told. Though my mother's family had never seemed to feel any particular kinship with me, had always looked at me with a particular kind of puzzlement, as though I were a word in a language they almost but didn't quite speak. I have my father's high cheekbones and my father's dark hair, but I have eyes that are a strange shade of amber brown that nobody in the Runningwater family shares, and I have a bone structure around my jaw that my Aunt Cecilia once called, in a moment of careless honesty, very different from ours. I had been trying to figure out what she meant by that for years. That night, walking out of the anniversary party with my fractured arm held against my chest and my eyes dry and my jaw set, I thought maybe I was finally about to find out. Let me tell you about the life I was leaving. I had lived in the Runningwater household since birth, or since what I had been told was my birth, a story my mother told with the practiced smoothness of something recited rather than remembered, in a hospital in Gallup, 7 pounds 2 ounces, October 19th, a Tuesday. I had a birth certificate that said all of this. I had a social security card. I had a school record stretching from kindergarten in Shiprock all the way through high school in Albuquerque, where we had moved when I was 13, and my father had gotten a job with a construction company that paid better than anything on or near the reservation. I had, in other words, all the paperwork of a real person, all the documentation of a life that was supposed to be mine. What I also had was Shania. Shania Runningwater is 3 years older than me, and she is, without question, the most beautiful person I have ever seen, in the way that certain dangerous things are beautiful. The way a flash flood is beautiful when you're watching it from high enough ground. She has our father's coloring and our mother's height and a quality of attention that makes you feel, when it is directed at you, like the only person in the world, and when it is withdrawn from you, like you have gone suddenly and irrevocably blind. She had been withdrawing it from me for most of my life. See, she had been doing this strategically, deliberately, as a method of control, and I had spent most of my life trying to earn it back, which is, I now understand, exactly what she intended. Our household operated on a simple economy. Shania's comfort was the currency, and everything else, my labor, my silence, my smallness, my perpetual willingness to take up less space, was the labor required to generate it. I cooked, I cleaned. I worked the dinner shift at a diner called the Turquoise Spoon 4 nights a week and handed most of my paycheck to my mother for what she called household expenses, a category whose boundaries I was never permitted to examine too closely. I did not go to college, though I had the grades for it. My father had said we could not afford it, and then Shania had enrolled at UNM the following year, and when I pointed this out, I was told that Shania had a plan, that Shania had direction, that Shania knew what she wanted to do with her life, implying, in the way my family implied everything they did not want to say directly, that I did not. What I wanted to do with my life was make things. I made jewelry. I made beadwork. I made pottery when I could get access to clay, painted in the style of the ledger artists I had studied in library books, wove small tapestries on a hand loom I had built from scavenged wood. I was good at these things in a way that felt, when I was doing them, like something flowing through me rather than coming from me, like I was a channel for something older and larger than myself. My mother occasionally said my work was pretty. My father never commented on it at all, which I had learned to interpret as his most complete form of dismissal. The medicine pouch had taken 4 months. I had chosen the pattern deliberately. It was a healing pattern, used in ceremonies for people who were sick or who had lost their way. And it seemed to me that my parents' marriage, which had been conducted for 30 years at a low-grade temperature of mutual disappointment, qualified as both. I had wanted to give them something that meant something. I had wanted, even at 23, even after everything, to be seen by my father as someone capable of giving something that mattered. Instead, he had hit me with his belt and told me my sister's check was better. And here is the thing about that moment. It's the thing that lives in me still. He was not wrong that the check was more valuable in the way that money is more valuable than meaning. He was not wrong that Shania's gift would pay for something real, something that could be spent, something the world would recognize. What he was wrong about, what he had always been wrong about, what my whole family had always been wrong about, was the belief that this made the check the better gift. That was the error. That was the rot at the center of everything. I walked out of the banquet hall and into the New Mexico night, which was cold and clear and enormous, the sky above Albuquerque showing a scatter of stars that the city lights could not entirely erase. I was wearing a ribbon skirt I had made myself, purple and black, and a silver concho belt that had belonged to my grandmother, my father's mother, and that I had asked to keep after she died. The one request of that nature I had ever made, and the one that had been granted, perhaps because no one else had thought to ask. My arm was throbbing. My cheek still held the blood taste where I had bitten it. I had my purse over my shoulder, and inside it I had $47 in cash, my phone with a cracked screen, my ID, and a manila envelope I had put there 3 days ago when something in me had begun to understand, in the way the body understands things before the mind catches up, that I might need it. The manila envelope contained a copy of my birth certificate, a copy of a letter I had found 2 years ago in a box in my parents' closet while I was looking for an old tax document my mother had asked me to retrieve, and a photograph. The letter I had read once standing in the closet and then folded back exactly as I had found it, and I had not spoken of it to anyone, but I had made a copy at the library, and I had kept it. Amma and Joseph with little Naya, 4 days Amma and Joseph with little Naya, 4 days old. My mother's name is not Amma. The parking lot of the banquet hall was a flat expanse of asphalt with a few struggling junipers along its edge and a string of lights that had been put up for the party and were visible through the windows in warm orange scallops. Oh, I stood in the cold and breathed and let myself feel the arm and then let myself feel past it, the way I had learned to do, the way you have to learn to do when pain is a regular feature of your life rather than an exceptional one. I thought, I have $47. I thought, I have a phone. I thought, I can walk to the bus stop on 4th Street and from there I can get to the shelter on Cole Avenue that takes people without reservations if they arrive before 10. It was 8:45. I was not going back inside. I was not going to say goodbye. There was no one in there I needed to say goodbye to, and this realization, which should have been devastating, arrived instead with the particular lightness of something long known, finally acknowledged. I did not belong to those people. I had not belonged to them in some way I had never been able to name. And whatever was in the manila envelope, whatever the full story was behind the letter and the photograph and the woman named Amma holding a baby someone had called Little Naya, it was the story I was supposed to have been living. I was going to find it. I didn't know how. I had $47 and a cracked phone and a fractured arm, and I was 23 years old, and I was standing in a parking lot in Albuquerque in a ribbon skirt in November. But I was going to find it. A car pulled up beside me. A dark blue sedan, clean, late model, New Mexico plates. The window came down and I stepped back automatically, the instinctive caution of a woman alone in a parking lot at night, and a man looked out at me. He was older, 60, maybe 65, with silver hair worn long and tied back and a face that was angular and weathered in a particular way, and eyes, I noticed, that were a shade of amber brown I had seen somewhere before, every day, in every mirror. "Shh, Naya," he said. Not a question. I stood very still. "Who are you?" He looked at me for a long moment, and his face did something complicated, grief moving through it like weather, fast and visible and then gone. "My name is Joseph Swiftwind," he said, "and I have been trying to find you for 23 years. Will you get in the car? There's someone with me who can explain everything. A lawyer. I brought a lawyer. I wanted you to know you're safe, that this is safe." He was talking fast. The words of someone who had rehearsed this and then, at the moment of delivery, found that rehearsal had not been sufficient. "I am your biological father. I know you have no reason to believe me, but I have documents. I have a DNA test already done from a sample you gave without knowing it. A cup from the diner 3 months ago. I know that sounds—" "You came to the diner," I said. "Yes, 3 months ago. The man who ordered the green chile stew and the coffee and left a $40 tip." Something moved across his face. Hope, I thought. Recognition. "You remembered." "I remember everyone who tips $40, I said. "I also remember you left quickly, and you took your coffee cup with you." "I did," he said. "But your water glass—" "You took that too," I said. "I noticed because we're short on glasses. We have to hand wash them." I looked at him. My arm was still throbbing. The stars were very bright above us. Somewhere behind the banquet hall windows, my father, Raymond Runningwater, the man I had called father for 23 years, was probably explaining to his guests that I was sensitive, that I had always been sensitive, that the belt was a normal response to disrespect, that Shania's gift had really been much more appropriate. I looked at the amber-brown eyes in Joseph Swiftwind's face, and I thought about the photograph in my purse. The one where a woman named Amma held a baby, and a man named Joseph stood beside her. I looked at his jawline. I thought about my Aunt Cecilia saying very different from ours. "Okay," I said. "I'll get in the car." Before I go on, if this story is reaching you, if it's landing in some place in you that knows what it is to be the one who gets the belt instead of the check, please like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. It means this story finds the people who need it. And drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what time it is there. I want to know who's out there in the dark with me. In the back seat of the dark blue sedan, there was a woman named Patricia Hale, who was, she told me, a family law attorney licensed in New Mexico and Arizona, and who had worked with Joseph Swiftwind for the past 8 months on what she called choosing her words with the care of someone who had been doing this for a long time, a wrongful deprivation proceeding. Inside it were the first language she trusted. "Are you injured?" she said, looking at the way I was holding my arm. "My arm," I said. "I think it might be fractured." She and Joseph exchanged a look. "We're going to take you to urgent care," she said. "Right now, before anything else. Oh, and we're going to document that injury. Is that okay with you?" Something about the phrase "is that okay with you" made me want to cry, which surprised me. Nobody in the Running Water household had asked me if things were okay with me, as a general policy. "Yes," I said. "That's okay with me." "Can I ask what happened?" I told her. I told her about the medicine pouch and the belt and the way my father had said your sister brought a better gift, and she listened without interrupting. "I just described as criminal assault causing bodily harm. I want you to know that I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. I am a good person. I am not a criminal. Just described as criminal assault causing bodily harm under New Mexico statute. It is also, given what I'm about to tell you about your legal situation, one of several incidents that will be relevant to what we're doing. But first, the hospital. The urgent care clinic was on Lomas Boulevard and still open at 9 in the evening, the way urgent care clinics in Albuquerque tend to be, because Albuquerque is a city with a lot of urgent situations and not enough emergency rooms. The nurse who took my information was a brisk woman named Dolores, who looked at my arm and at the red welt rising on my shoulder and said, with a flatness that was its own form of kindness, "How did this happen?" I told the truth. I told her the same thing I had told Patricia Hale, and Dolores wrote it down and did not soften her expression or offer me a way out of the story. And I understood that she had heard versions of this story before, and that her particular form of witness was in the writing down, the accurate recording, the creation of a document that would exist outside of my family's preferred narrative. The X-ray confirmed the hairline fracture. They gave me a brace and a prescription for ibuprofen and a paper explaining signs of complications, and Dolores, before I left, pressed a card into my hand, a domestic violence resource card, the kind printed in 3 languages, and said, "You don't have to go back." "I know," I said, and for the first time in my life saying it, I believed it. We sat in a booth at a 24-hour diner on Central Avenue, not the Turquoise Spoon, which was on the other side of the city and where I could not have stood to be seen. And Patricia Hale opened her briefcase and Joseph Swiftwind put his hands on the table and looked at me with those amber brown eyes, my eyes, and told me the story of my life. I was born on October 19th, 23 years ago, in Gallup, New Mexico. That part was true. My birth weight was 7 pounds 2 ounces. That was also true. My mother's name was Amanda Swiftwind. I called Amma by everyone who loved her. And she was Dene, To'ahani clan, born for the Tachi-Ni, and she was 22 years old when she had me, and she died of complications from a postpartum hemorrhage 4 days after my birth. 4 days. 4 days that were long enough for someone to take a photograph of her holding me, and for Joseph Swiftwind to stand beside her, and for someone to write on the back of it Amma and Joseph with little Naya, 4 days old. Joseph had been 24. He had been working for a wildlife conservation organization on the Navajo Nation, doing habitat restoration work in the Chusca Mountains. When Amma died, he had been, by his own description, destroyed. Not functioning. He had gone back to her family's community for the funeral, and he had made arrangements, or he had believed he had made arrangements, for his sister to care for me while he got through the first months of grief and tried to figure out how to be a single father to an infant. His sister's name was Caroline Swiftwind, who had married a man named Raymond Runningwater 6 years earlier. I sat with this for a moment. The diner was bright and smelled like coffee and green chile and the particular kind of late-night fry-cook grease that I associated with the Turquoise Spoon, with the after-midnight hours when the drunks came in and wanted eggs. Outside on Central Avenue, a bus went by. I watched it go. "She was your sister," I said to Joseph. "Raymond Runningwater's wife. The woman who raised me. She's your sister." "Half-sister," Joseph said. "Different fathers. We weren't close, but she was family and she had a child already." "Shania." "Yes, and she said she would care for you. She said she would keep you until I was ready." He stopped. His hands on the table were very still, the hands of a man who had learned stillness as a discipline. The way people learn it when they have spent a long time in pain and found that stillness is its only management. "She didn't keep you until I was ready," he said. "She kept you, permanently, and she did it in such a way that I couldn't—" He stopped again. Patricia Hale took over. She had a way of moving into silences that felt not like interruption, but like continuation, like she was the next instrument in a piece of music. "What Caroline Runningwater did," she said carefully, amounts to what is legally classified as custodial fraud. She obtained a falsified birth certificate listing herself as your biological mother, using documents that appear to have been prepared with the assistance of a notary who was later disbarred for unrelated fraud in 2019. She used these documents to establish herself as your legal guardian and then your legal parent. She also, Patricia turned a page in her notebook, filed paperwork with the Tribal Family Services Office indicating that Joseph Swiftwind had voluntarily relinquished his parental rights, which he had not done. This filing contained a forged signature. I thought about the letter I had found in my parents' closet, the one I had copied and put in my manila envelope. I pulled out the envelope now and put it on the table, and Patricia and Joseph both looked at it. "I found this 2 years ago," I said. "I didn't understand it then. I think I understand it now." I opened it and took out the letter and unfolded it on the table between us. It was a letter from an organization called the Native American Family Preservation Coalition, dated 15 years ago, addressed to Raymond and Caroline Runningwater. It stated that the coalition had received an inquiry from a Joseph Swiftwind regarding the whereabouts and welfare of a minor child, Naya Swiftwind, born October 19th, and requested that the Runningwaters respond to the inquiry within 30 days. At the bottom of the letter, in my mother's, in Caroline's, handwriting, were 4 words. Do not respond. Burn. She hadn't burned it. Whether this was carelessness or some small buried refusal of her own conscience, I had no way to know. But she hadn't burned it, and I had found it, and I had made a copy. And now it was on the table in a diner on Central Avenue, and Joseph Swiftwind was looking at it with an expression I had no word for, something in the territory between vindication and agony. The feeling, I imagined, of being believed about a thing you have been saying for 15 years. That's the first piece, Patricia said. There's more. There was much more. Over the next 2 hours, with coffee refills arriving at regular intervals from a server who either did not notice or professionally ignored the intensity of our conversation, Patricia Hale laid out what 8 months of investigation had uncovered. Joseph had hired her after years of being stonewalled by the Tribal Family Services Office, by the state, by lawyers who told him his case was too old, too complicated, too buried under falsified paperwork to pursue. He had finally found Patricia through a legal aid network that specialized in Native family cases, and Patricia had found, in the records of the Gallup County Clerk's Office and the New Mexico Bureau of Vital Records and the Navajo Nation's own Family Services Archive, a paper trail that was, she said, among the most deliberately obscured she had seen in 20 years of practice. But that was nonetheless there. The falsified birth certificate, the forged relinquishment document, a financial record showing that my biological grandmother, Joseph's mother, my grandmother, had left a trust of $83,000 to be held for me, Naya Swiftwind, until my 18th birthday, a trust that had been accessed and largely depleted by Caroline Runningwater using a power of attorney document that the estate attorney who had drafted the original trust said he had never prepared and did not recognize. The current balance of the trust was $412. Approximately $82,000 over the course of 12 years, Patricia said. Given that you did not receive this money or its benefits, and given the power of attorney was fraudulent, yes. That is the legal framework we're working within. I thought about the years of handing my diner paychecks to Caroline for household expenses. I thought about the years of Shania's tuition. I thought about the medicine pouch I had made from beads I had bought with tips, working 4 months of early mornings. I thought about my grandmother, a woman I had never known, who had set aside $83,000 for me, and whose love I had never received because the woman who stole it from me had also stolen the knowledge that it existed. I did not cry. I want to be precise about this, too. I did not cry, which is not because I did not feel it. I felt it. I feel it still. I did not cry because crying would have been a release, and I did not want release yet. I wanted clarity. I wanted to understand completely and without softening exactly what had been done to me and by whom and for how long, because I had spent 23 years being imprecise about my own life, and I was finished with that now. Give me all of it, I thought. Give me every piece. What do we do? I said. Patricia smiled. Small, controlled, the smile of someone who had been waiting for exactly this question. We file, she said. We file in tribal court and in state court concurrently. We file for legal recognition of your correct identity. We file for recovery of the trust funds. We file regarding the fraudulent documentation. And tonight, she looked at my arm in its brace, we file a police report about what happened at that anniversary party. My father, I started. Raymond Runningwater is not your father, Patricia said, gently but without equivocation. He has no biological or legal relationship to you. He is the husband of the woman who fraudulently assumed custody of you. Whatever you choose to call him in your personal life is your business. Legally, he is a stranger to you who struck you with a belt and broke your arm. A stranger. Raymond Runningwater, who had towered over my childhood, who had determined by his approval or disapproval what the temperature of each day would be, who had held the belt, and who had decided that my 4 months of beadwork was worth less than a check, who had been the axis around which our entire household's emotional gravity organized itself. A stranger to me, with no legal claim on me, with no legal right to what he had done tonight or any of the nights before it. The clarity I had wanted arrived, and it was immense, and it was cold, and it was exactly what I needed. I gave a statement to the Albuquerque Police Department that night. Dice across from me in the booth and wrote down across from me in the booth and wrote down everything I said with a focus that told me he understood what kind of story this was. He photographed my arm. He photographed the welt on my shoulder, which had deepened to a vivid bruise by then. He took Patricia's card and Joseph's card and said the case would be assigned to a detective within 48 hours. When he left, Joseph looked at me across the table and said, "I have a guest room. If you want," and stopped, understanding, I think, that he could not make this invitation without also acknowledging its weight, the enormous complexity of what he was offering, which was not just a room, but the possibility of a different version of my life. "I out the rest." I paused. "I need to go out the rest." I paused. "I need to go back to the hall first, to get the medicine pouch." He looked at me. "You want to go back there tonight?" "I made it for someone," I said. "It wasn't for them. I made it wrong. I made it for the wrong people. I want it back." I thought for a moment. And I want to look at my mother's face when I leave." Patricia drove me. Joseph waited in the car. When I walked back into the banquet hall, still lit, music still playing, though quieter now, the evening winding down, the room went still again. The same stillness as before, but different in quality. Before it had been the stillness of shock. Now it was something more uncertain, more watchful. People had talked during my absence. You could see it in the way they arranged themselves. The way my father's brother Desmond was standing near the bar with his arms crossed and his face troubled. The way the elder women had moved into a cluster near the back of the room that had the quality of deliberation. Caroline, my mother, the woman who had raised me, the woman who had taken $82,000 of my grandmother's love and spent it on household expenses, was standing near the gift table. She saw me come in and her face did something I had not expected. It went white, not surprised, white in the way of recognition, of a person seeing what they have dreaded long enough that the actual arrival of it is almost a relief. She knows, I thought. She has always known this moment was coming. That was the thing about fraud. You could never entirely forget it. It was always there, the shadow shape of what you'd done, living alongside every ordinary day. My father, Raymond, was at the bar. He turned when the room went quiet and saw me, and his face did something entirely different, something that was not recognition, but was instead the particular blankness of a man who believes his actions require no justification and is mildly annoyed at being interrupted. "You came back," he said. "To get my property," I said. I walked to the gift table and picked up the medicine pouch. It was undamaged. Of course it was. It had been made carefully from good materials, by someone who knew what she was doing. I held it in my hand and felt the beads, the careful rows of turquoise and coral and white shell, the pattern that was a healing pattern, my family's pattern, mine more than I had known. I looked at Caroline. I said, "I know about the trust." She said nothing. She had gone very still in the particular Dene way of people who are holding something in place through force of will. "I know about the birth certificate," I said. "I know about the relinquishment document with the forged signature. I know about the power of attorney." I watched her face while I said these things, and what I saw was not defiance, not anger, but something that resembled, in a way that was almost unbearable to witness, grief. as though somewhere in Caroline running water there was a version of herself that knew, had always known, that she had done something that could not be undone, and had been grieving it for 23 years in a private place she showed no one. I did not feel compassion for her in that moment. I want to be honest about that. I was 23 years old with a fractured arm and $47 and 23 years of being the wrong sister, the lesser gift, the child whose labor and smallness and silence had been extracted and spent. Compassion would come later, in the careful work of therapy and time, in the process of understanding that people who do the things Caroline did are usually also people who have been done to, who have their own closets full of letters they should have burned but couldn't. That understanding would come. That night, standing in the banquet hall with the medicine pouch in my good hand and the bruise spreading across my shoulder, I had not yet arrived at it. "I'm leaving," I said. "I won't be back. You'll be hearing from a lawyer." I looked at Raymond. "Both of you." Raymond started to say something. I saw his mouth begin to form words, the beginning of a bluster, an explanation, a reframing of the last 23 years in terms that absolved him. And I turned and walked out the door before he could finish, and this time I did not look back. In the weeks that followed, my life acquired a texture I had never experienced, the texture of being believed. It is a particular sensation, being believed, not just accepted or tolerated or managed, but genuinely believed, your account of your own experience treated as the primary document, the authoritative text, the one that other evidence is measured against rather than the one that must justify itself against other evidence. Patricia Hale believed me. The detective assigned to my assault case, a woman named Sandoval who had the compressed, observant manner of someone who had learned to find the truth in the spaces between what people said, believed me. There's the caseworker at the Native American Family Services Organization that Joseph connected me with believed me. And Joseph himself, my father, my biological father, the man whose amber-brown eyes I had looked at my whole life in the mirror without knowing whose they were, believed me in the most complete way, which is to say he did not require me to perform my own pain for him, but simply placed himself, steadily and without drama, in the position of someone who would help. His house was in Bernalillo, north of Albuquerque, a modest adobe with a garden that even in November held the dried stalks of corn and sunflowers and the woody remnants of an herb garden that he told me my grandmother had started and that he maintained in her memory. He had a dog, a large old black lab named Theodore, who moved with the stateliness of a very senior statesman and who took an immediate and serious interest in me, following me from room to room in those first days with a gravity that suggested he understood the significance of my arrival. I found I didn't mind. I had never had a dog. The running waters had not kept pets, another thing on the long list of pleasures that had simply not been part of the texture of my childhood. I slept for the first 3 days in a way I had never slept before. Long, heavy, dreamless, the sleep of a person whose body has finally been given permission to rest. I woke each morning to the smell of coffee and the sound of Joseph moving quietly in the kitchen, and I lay in the guest bed, clean white sheets, a Pendleton blanket in the colors of sunset, a window that looked out at the Sandia Mountains turning pink in the early light, and I tried to absorb the reality of where I was. I was in my father's house. My father was alive. My father was a man who grew corn and maintained his mother's herb garden and had spent 23 years looking for me and had kept looking when everyone told him to stop. I began to ask him questions after the 3rd day when the sleep debt had been partially repaid and I had enough cognitive space to want to understand rather than simply to be. I asked about my mother. He told me about Amanda Swiftwind, called Amma, who had been the sort of person who, as he put it, has made everything more interesting. Not dramatic, not difficult, just more interesting, more alive, more worth paying attention to. She had been a weaver. She had also been a painter. She had made things with her hands in the way I made things with my hands. And when Joseph said this, he looked at the medicine pouch, which I had placed on the windowsill of the guest room where the morning light could reach it. And he was quiet for a moment. "She would have," he started, and stopped. See, you don't have to, I said. She would have loved that, he said. That pattern. She knew that pattern. It was her grandmother's. It was her grandmother's, which meant it was my great-grandmother's, which meant that the pattern I had found in a library photograph and been drawn to without understanding why was already mine, had always been mine, was the pattern of my own blood expressing itself through me without my knowledge, was the way rivers will find their level regardless of what barriers have been placed in their path. I cried then. I want to include this because I said before that I did not cry at the anniversary party, and I want you to know that I did eventually cry. At my father's kitchen table, with Theodore's large, warm head on my knee and the Sandia Mountains outside the window turning from pink to gold, I cried for a long time, for the weaver who had died 4 days after I was born, for the 23 years of a different life I had not been allowed to live, for the pattern I had stitched without knowing it was already mine. The legal process moved in the way that legal processes move, which is to say much more slowly than the urgency of the situation seemed to warrant, and with a great deal of paperwork. Patricia filed in tribal court first, seeking a legal declaration of my correct identity, and in state court concurrently, pursuing the fraud and theft claims. The DNA test results, which had been processed through a lab in Phoenix, were filed as evidence. A 99.97% probability of paternity, the kind of number that doesn't leave room for alternative interpretations. The assault case moved separately. Detective Sandoval interviewed witnesses who had been at the anniversary party. 3 of them, including Uncle Desmond and 2 of the elder women, agreed to give statements. Their statements confirmed what I had described. Desmond, in particular, was specific and unflinching in his account, and when Sandoval relayed this to Patricia, Patricia said, with the quiet satisfaction of a professional who has seen enough cases to know when the ground is solid, "Good, that's very good." Raymond Runningwater was charged with criminal battery causing bodily harm. He was arraigned and released on his own recognizance with a court date set for 3 months out. I was not required to be present at the arraignment. Patricia advised me not to be. Wushi and I agreed, because I did not need to see his face to know that the charge existed, that it was documented, that the fracture in my arm was a matter of public record that could not be argued away or reframed or explained in terms that made it smaller than it was. Caroline was a more complicated situation. The fraud charges, for the falsified birth certificate, the forged relinquishment document, the fraudulent power of attorney, and the misappropriation of trust funds, were filed by the tribal prosecutor and by the state attorney general's office because the crimes crossed jurisdictions in ways that required both. She was charged in tribal court with custodial fraud and in state court with forgery and financial exploitation. Her attorney, when retained, apparently advised her immediately that she had very little ground to stand on, because the paper trail was, as Patricia had described it, obscured but not erased. And 23 years of obscuration had not changed the underlying reality of what the documents said. I did not watch Caroline's process with the same attention I gave to the rest of my life during those months. I was busy. I was, for the first time, genuinely busy with my own actual life rather than the maintenance of someone else's. I had found a studio space, a small converted garage near downtown Albuquerque rented to artists by a collective that operated on a sliding scale, and I had begun working every day, full days of work, long, sustained hours of the making things that had always been the clearest version of myself. I was making a series of large beadwork panels, bigger than anything I had attempted before, each working from photographs of my mother's weaving that Joseph had kept in albums and scanning them to understand the structures she had used, the ways she had built color and pattern into cloth. I understood, continuing her work, picking up a thread that had been dropped 23 years ago and carrying it forward. I was also meeting people. This seems like a small thing, but it was not. I had not, in the Runningwater household, I'd been permitted the social life that other young people take for granted. There was always a reason I was needed at home, a shift to cover, a task that couldn't wait, a version of my unavailability that was engineered rather than organic. Now I had evenings that were mine. I went to a drum circle that Joseph's friend organized on the first Friday of each month. I started attending services at a cultural center near the university that offered language classes in Diné Bizad, thou which I had never been taught despite being told I was Navajo my whole life, which was one of the smaller ironies of my situation and also one of the things I felt most sharply. Language is kin. Language is connection to the people who spoke before you. I had been kept from mine, and learning it now, in a classroom with a patient teacher named Shirley and a handful of other adults who had come to the language late, was an experience I can only describe as a kind of coming home to a home you have never actually lived in. I also started therapy. I want to mention this clearly because I think people sometimes treat therapy as a secondary thing, a supplementary thing, an option for when the real work is done, and that is exactly backwards. The therapy was the infrastructure. My therapist, a Pueblo woman named Dr. Runningwater, no relation, she said when I explained my situation, and we both acknowledged the coincidence with a kind of dark comedy, specialized in intergenerational trauma and family systems, and she helped me begin to understand the structure of what I had lived through, not just as a series of bad events, but as a system, a closed loop of manipulation and need and fear that had been running in my family long before I arrived in it. She helped me understand Caroline. Not excuse her. Dr. Runningwater was very clear about the difference, but understand her. Oh, the way you understand a mechanism. The way you understand how a thing works so that you can make an informed decision about whether you want to be near it. Caroline Runningwater had wanted a baby and had not been able to conceive a second child after Shania. She had wanted Joseph's baby specifically, I think, in the way that some people fix their desire on a particular absent thing and cannot redirect it. She had taken me and told herself it was care. It had maintained the fiction of care for 23 years, while also, necessarily, keeping me small enough that I could not threaten the fiction, could not become someone whose questions were too large to manage. Shania had been the natural beneficiary of this arrangement, the original child, the biological child, the one who was real in the way Caroline needed realness. I had been the managed one, the one whose authenticity was dangerous, whose realness had to be contained. This is not a defense of what Caroline did. It is an explanation of the machinery. Understanding the machinery helped me stop looking for ways I might have prevented it, ways I might have been different or better or smaller or larger that would have changed the outcome. The outcome was structural. It was built before I arrived. My job now was to build different structures. The formal hearing in tribal court was held in Window Rock, Arizona, on the Navajo Nation, 5 months after the anniversary party. I drove up with Joseph and Patricia, 3 hours through desert that in March held a particular kind of beauty, the red rocks and the spare sage and the enormous sky that seemed to exist on a different scale than the sky anywhere else, larger and more demanding of attention. The courtroom was a modest room in a low building, wood-paneled, with photographs of former chief justices on the walls and the Navajo Nation seal over the judge's bench. The judge was a woman named Judge Cly, who had gray-streaked hair and reading glasses, and the manner of someone who had heard a great many things in this room and could be surprised, but chose not to show it. Caroline was present with her attorney, a man from Gallup who looked as though he had advised his client to plead no contest to the tribal charges and was managing the hearing as a process rather than a fight. Raymond was not present. His own charges were being handled separately in state court. Patricia presented the case with the methodical, building quality I had come to associate with her best work. The documents laid out in sequence, each one explained, each one connected to the next. The paper trail that Caroline had tried to bury 23 years ago, now exhumed and arranged under the fluorescent lights of the tribal courtroom in its full, damning clarity. The forged relinquishment, the falsified birth certificate, the letter from the Native American Family Preservation Coalition with its 4-word instruction, "Do not respond. Burn." The financial records showing the drawdown of $82,000 from my grandmother's trust. The DNA results. I gave testimony. I had prepared for this with Patricia over several sessions, not scripting it. Patricia had been clear that the testimony should be my words, my account, my experience, but structuring it, I was making sure I included the things that needed to be included, that I did not lose my thread in the emotion of it. I sat in the witness chair, and I looked at Judge Cly, and I told her about my life. I told her about the cooking and the cleaning and the diner shifts and the paychecks handed over for household expenses. I told her about the medicine pouch and the belt and the arm. I told her about the letter I had found in the closet and the photograph with Amma and Joseph and little Naya, 4 days old. I told her about the language I had not been taught and the inheritance I had not been given, and the father who had been looking for me for 23 years while I grew up in his sister's house not knowing he existed. I spoke in Dine Bizad for the last part of my testimony. Shirley's class had given me enough, and I had prepared these particular sentences carefully, with Joseph's help, because I wanted to say them in the language that was mine. It is the language I had been kept from, to say them in this room where they might be recorded and understood. I said, "This is my life. This is what was taken from me. I am still here." The room was very quiet when I finished. Judge Cly asked Caroline's attorney if his client wished to offer any response. He consulted briefly with Caroline, who was sitting very still in her chair with her hands folded in her lap, and then he said that she did not. Judge Cly looked at Caroline directly and asked if she understood the nature of the findings that had been presented, and Caroline said yes. Her voice was very small. I watched her face and saw again what I had seen at the anniversary party, that underlying grief, the private accounting of a person who has known for a long time what she has done and has been paying the interest on it daily in ways no one else could see. I looked away. It was not mine to carry. Judge Cly's ruling came the following week, delivered in a written decision that Patricia called one of the clearest she had read in years. The tribal court found that the relinquishment document was fraudulent, that the power of attorney was fraudulent, that Caroline Runningwater had obtained unlawful custody of a tribal member's child and had maintained that custody through deliberate deception for 23 years. The court ordered the recognition of my correct identity, Naya Swiftwind, a daughter of Joseph Swiftwind and Amanda Swiftwind, Toahani clan, born for the Tachini, and referred the trust fraud to the tribal prosecutor for full proceedings. The state court findings came 6 weeks later. Similar in conclusion, different in procedural texture. More formal, more procedural, with more emphasis on the financial fraud specifically, on the misappropriation of the $82,000 and the fraudulent power of attorney used to access it. The state court ordered full restitution of the trust funds with interest, calculated over the 12 years during which they had been drawn down. The total came to $114,000. Caroline Runningwater pled guilty to fraud and forgery charges in both tribal and state court. She was sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation, community service, and mandatory participation in a restorative justice program. She did not receive prison time, which Patricia explained was not uncommon in first-time fraud cases of this type, particularly where the defendant accepted responsibility and cooperated with restitution proceedings. I will not tell you how I felt about this because my feelings about it are complex and ongoing and not yet resolved into something I can summarize cleanly. What I will tell you is that I was not consulted about the sentence, because victims of this type of crime are rarely given direct input into sentencing. That Patricia told me this was something worth advocating to change, and that I agreed with her. Raymond Runningwater's assault case resolved with a plea to criminal battery, a fine and 2 years of probation. He was ordered to complete an anger management program. His social reputation in the Albuquerque Navajo community, which had been built on a scaffolding of respectability, the successful construction job, the long marriage, at the celebration parties, collapsed with a completeness that I had not anticipated and that I find I cannot be entirely dispassionate about. People talk. The elder women who had been at the anniversary party talked. Desmond talked. The correctness of what had happened in that banquet hall and what had been happening for 23 years, and what it said about the man who had presented himself as respectable had spread through the community in the way that truth often eventually spreads, slowly and then all at once. Shania was, in all of this, her own category of complicated. She had not known, or claimed she had not known, the specific details of my origin, the fraud, the trust, the forged documents. This was plausible. She had been 3 years old when I arrived. She had grown up believing, or had constructed herself to believe, that the arrangement of our family was natural, that her centrality was natural, that my periphery was natural. When the legal proceedings became public and she could no longer maintain that construction, she called me once. One phone call on an evening in April when the desert outside Joseph's house was beginning its brief spring bloom and the air smelled of rain and sage. I answered because I had decided I would, because I thought I owed myself the experience of that conversation, the chance to hear what she would say. She said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know." She said, "I want you to know that and paused for a long time, and in the pause I could hear the quality of her struggle, the genuine internal effort of a person who had been told her whole life that she was the more important one being required to construct something different. "I want you to know that I'm sorry," she finished. "I don't know how to be sorry in a way that's enough, but I am." I thought about this. I thought about the medicine pouch pattern and the language classes and the trust and Theodore the dog and Joseph growing corn. I thought about my mother, Amma, who had died 4 days after I was born and whose love had been rerouted and spent before I was old enough to know it should have been mine. I thought about what Dr. Runningwater had said about the difference between understanding and excusing, between accountability and forgiveness, between the thing you choose to release and the thing you choose to keep. "I hear you," I said. "That's all I have right now. I hear you." It was the truth. It was the most I had. She hung up, and I sat on Joseph's porch in the April evening and watched the mountains change color in the last light. And Theodore came and sat beside me with his old statesman's gravity, and I put my hand on his warm black head and breathed. I did not become a different person after all of this. I want to be clear about that because I think there is a version of this kind of story that requires transformation, a before and after, a caterpillar to butterfly arc of the self, and that is not what happened. I was the same person I had always been, the person who made things with her hands, who had stitched 4 months of early mornings into a healing pattern without knowing it was her family's, who had bitten her own cheek and refused to cry in front of a room full of people who owed her more than they had ever paid. That person had always existed. What changed was the context around her, the information she was permitted to have about herself, the question of whose story she was actually living. A year later, I had a studio of my own, a proper one, rented in a building near Old Town that had good north light and enough room for large format work. I was selling. The beadwork panels, the series built on my mother's weaving photographs, had been shown at a small gallery run by a collective of indigenous artists, and 2 of them had sold within a week of opening to collectors who understood what they were looking at. I had been featured in a regional arts journal. I had been contacted by a museum in Santa Fe about a commission. I was also helping Patricia with a different case, not as a lawyer, I was not a lawyer, but as an informal consultant for a family services advocacy organization she was involved with, bringing my experience to bear on cases where Indigenous children were being separated from their biological families through paperwork that may not have been what it appeared. I was not the only one this had happened to. I had known this abstractly, but learning it concretely, meeting other people whose lives had been similarly rerouted by similar frauds, which was both devastating and galvanizing in a way I had not expected. There was community in it. There was work to be done. My grandmother's trust, restored with interest to $114,000 and transferred to my account in the name of Naya Swiftwind, was mostly intact. I had used some of it for the studio, some for a used car, some for the first year of language school tuition at a program connected to the Navajo Nation that offered immersive Diné Bazad instruction for speakers who had come to the language late. The rest I was holding. I was not ready to spend it quickly. It was my grandmother's love, deferred for 23 years, and I wanted to use it with the care that deserved. Joseph and I had dinner every Sunday. This had evolved naturally from the first months of living in his house. When Sunday dinner was one of the ways we practiced being family without making too much of the practice. We cooked together usually. He had grown up cooking and so had I, though for very different reasons, and we found that we had compatible instincts in the kitchen, that we made food in the same way, by feel rather than by measurement. He was teaching me the names of plants in Dine Bizaid. I was teaching him beadwork, which he had tried once and declared required more patience than he possessed, and we had laughed, genuinely laughed, and it had been strange and good, the laugh of people who are learning each other from a late start and finding that the late start is not an impediment so much as a different kind of beginning. "She would have liked you," he said one Sunday evening, speaking of Amma in the present tense the way he sometimes did, as though grief had taught him that the past tense was only one option. She would have just been so glad. I held the medicine pouch in my hand. I had put it on the windowsill of the guest room in the beginning and then moved it to the studio, and now it lived on the kitchen windowsill in Joseph's house, where the morning light found it and the beads caught the light and threw small color onto the white walls, turquoise and coral and white shell. It was the healing pattern that was my family's. That was mine. "I am too," I said, glad, slowly, but glad. And before I end this story, I want to say something to you, to whoever is watching, wherever you are, whatever time it is there. I want to say that this story is about accountability, not revenge. It is important to me that you hear that distinction. I did not set out to destroy Raymond and Caroline Runningwater. I set out to know the truth of my own life, and the truth, when it was fully known, had legal consequences that I did not create and did not manage and did not direct. The consequences were the natural result of the truth meeting the structures that exist to respond to it. I am not the instrument of their punishment. The documents are, the records are. The fracture in my arm, photographed in black and white, is. What I did, what I am doing still, is simply insist on the accuracy of my own story. That is all. That is everything. For them, the name. They deserve to know for them, the name. They deserve to know whose eyes they are looking at when they look in the mirror. I deserved all of these things. I have them now, imperfectly and incompletely, and with the particular texture of things that have been recovered rather than simply possessed, but I have them. If any part of what I've said here resonates with you, if you know this story from the inside, if you are the one who was given the belt instead of the benefit of the doubt, the wrong gift, the lesser position, the borrowed name, I want you to know that the documents exist. The records exist. The truth, however buried, is findable, and there are people who will help you find it. Patricia Hales exist. Surely the language teachers exist. Josephs, who have been looking for 23 years, exist. And the medicine pouch, whatever yours is, whatever the 4 months of early morning work represents for you, whatever the healing pattern is that has been coming through you without your full understanding, it is yours. It was always yours. Share your experience in the comments if you feel moved to. Tell me your story. Tell me where you're watching from and what you're carrying. I'll be here. Next time I'll be sharing another story that I think you need to hear, about a woman who discovered her inheritance was stolen not by family, but by the very attorney hired to protect it, and how one receipt changed everything. You won't want to miss it. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. I'll see you soon.